Welcome to this Experts Online event from MED-EL. I've got the nod to say we can go ahead and get started. The session today is Screen Time, Educational or a Distraction, where we will discuss how screen time impacts communication development in children using cochlear implants. And we'll learn about some ways to get apps and screens working in our favour. We are joined by Dr. Emily Lund and Lynn Wood. Emily is going to share with us her research into vocabulary development of children with cochlear implants and also discuss how screen time can affect vocabulary learning. Then, Lynn Wood is going to share with us how apps can support communication development with a little bit of thought and adjustment into how we use them. And she's going to share her knowledge and experience about how we as professionals can use devices in our work and guide and coach parents and families to use screens effectively to support communication development in their children. So I've got a few tips that I would like to run through before we start, just to make sure the meeting runs smoothly for everyone today. Please double check your name, your screen name or your display name, to make sure it reflects your full name. If it doesn't, please find your name in the participants panel, click on More, and then rename. Add your full name, and you can also add your organisation or the country where you're joining us from as well. To avoid any background noise, please mute your microphone if you're not speaking. For a stable internet connection on your side, we recommend that you close any other programs that are running on your device. Your comments and questions are always welcome. So I encourage you to type those in chat along the way, and we're going to have time at the end of the session to address all of those. If you would like to see captioning in English, please click on the closed caption button at the bottom of the screen. My mum used to say to my siblings and I when we were younger, if you watch too much TV, you'll get square eyes, as a way of deterring us from the screen and getting us to go outside and play. And there's been various studies published in recent years about this topic and recommendations from various groups and organisations about screen time for children. So it's really easy to be unsure about what's best when it comes to screen time for children with hearing loss and also their families. So I'd be really interested to hear a little bit about your experience with this. And for this, I'd like to go over to Menti so that we can respond to a couple of questions. So I encourage you to grab your phone and go to the camera and simply take a photo of the QR code. And that will send you straight to our Menti poll. Alternatively, you can open another internet browser on your screen and type in menti.com and then enter the code to access these questions. The code for our quiz is 1189583. So I'm going to give you a few moments to access that Mentimeter platform. Again, you can take out your smartphone and hold your camera over the QR code, or you can go to menti.com on your internet browser. The code again is 1189583. So I can see many of you have already accessed that first question in Menti. Have families you work with asked for your advice about screen time for children? You can respond with yes many times, occasionally, or no. I'm going to give you a few more moments to respond to this question. If you can't access this platform, feel free to go ahead and add your comments in chat. We're seeing a real split of responses between yes many times and occasionally. This question certainly came up a lot for me in my clinical work, and I was always torn or conflicted about how to respond to find the right balance for families and for children. So that's why I'm thrilled to be able to be joined by Emily and Lynn today. I've got one more question for you on Menti, so we're going to click over to that now. And that is, when working with families face-to-face, so I'm not talking about remote therapy, I'm talking about when you're in the room with the family, do you use screens in your sessions? You can respond with yes, you use screens often, that you use screens occasionally in your sessions, or that you avoid screens altogether in your therapy session. I'm going to pause for a moment now and let you respond. I'm a little bit surprised by the responses coming in so far. I didn't expect it to be this way. If you have responded already, I would encourage you to type in chat. If you've responded with yes, you use screens often, let me know in chat, what are some of the benefits that you found with using screens? And for those of you who have said that you avoid screens in therapy, let me know why that is. There are no wrong answers here. It's more just about how you're feeling about using screen time. Wonderful. So we can see there that for the majority of us, we're using screen times occasionally. And that was certainly the case for me in my clinical practice as well. Kat has let me know in chat that she uses screens because children are usually really enthusiastic about using them in the sessions. Absolutely, and that's what I've seen as well. You can really get their attention and get them involved with using a screen. My colleagues sometimes avoid screens because we just aren't quite sure how to use them best or use them most effectively with children, and also guide families about their use as well. Wonderful. Let's head back over to the presentation. Do write in chat and let me know the other benefits or reasons why you're avoiding screen time. So without further ado, let's hand over to our first expert for the day so we can hear more about her research. So Dr. Emily Lund is an associate professor at the Davies School of Communication Sciences and Disorders, and an associate dean of research at the Harris College of Nursing and Health Sciences at the Texas University. Dr. Lund's research investigates the ways that oral language, sorry, I can't see all my screen there. Can I get you to move the chat box away from me there? Wonderful, thanks. So Dr. Lund's research investigates the way that oral language use contributes to spoken language and written language learning in monolingual and bilingual children with hearing loss. Thank you, Emily. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to start my screen share now. Okay, let's see. Okay, is everybody able to see that?
Yes, and I'll just ask you to put it in full screen mode, and then that's perfect.
Working on that. Whoop. Not too far. Okay. Are we ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So as Natalie said, I'm Emily Lund. I am an associate professor at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. And I study spoken language development in children with hearing loss with a particular focus on vocabulary learning. So today I'm going to share a little bit about what we know about vocabulary and screens. So first, I thought it might be helpful if we do some word learning ourselves to think a little bit about what needs to be present for a person to learn a word through spoken language. So I'm going to tell you a story about Sloodle. Sloodle likes to play outside and notice things in the sky. In Sloodle's world, when he went outside, sometimes he saw the sun during the day. When Sloodle went outside at night, he saw the moon. And when Sloodle went outside during the time between day and night, he saw a blicket. That was his favorite time of day, when he saw the blicket, because it was so beautiful. Okay, clearly I am not a television writer or a children's book author, but we're going to take a pop quiz anyway. So I want you to think to yourself, what color is Sloodle in this story? Do you know? What color's the moon? Do you know that? What about the blicket? Do you know what color the blicket is? Okay, so now I want you to think to yourself, how did you know all of that? Because I didn't teach any of it to you explicitly. So you used what you know about words, some inherent things that humans know about language to figure out what it was that I was talking about. So you probably identified Sloodle because he has a face. And you recognized that I was using words and syntax that talk about a character. You probably recognized the blicket through process of elimination. You knew sun and moon, I'm assuming, and so that other shape had to be the blicket. So you just went through a new task where you had to learn new vocabulary words. Let's talk about how children learn new vocabulary words then when they're not adult learners. They learn by hearing the same word across multiple situations, like you heard me use Sloodle's name several times. They learn by being directly taught, so trying to use a word and getting feedback. They also learn with these early assumptions. So the way that you used that process of elimination, children can do that too, and they often do, to figure out what it is that we're talking about. And they learn by using their other language knowledge. So again, the way that you knew I was using Sloodle's name, like a being's name. So you knew it had to be the thing with the face. So what mentally is happening behind the scenes when we develop new vocabulary? Well, first, a child who is learning from a device or not has to trigger learning. So that is, they have to recognize, hey, this is a word that I don't know, and this is the thing that it probably matches up to. So like when you figured out what the blicket was, you heard this new word and your brain went, like, I wonder what that is. I don't know that word. And you matched it to the only thing on that screen that didn't have a name. That happens almost instantly in typical development. Then children have to configure that word by coming up with the representation. So knowing that the word blicket has those sounds in order, like blick, it, and remembering the features of the thing that the word is paired with. So if you wanted to test your semantic representation that you built, you could close your eyes and try to like image the blicket. Do you know what it looks like? And would you recognize it as the blicket if you saw it again? And then finally, the child has to engage that new word with things that he or she already knows. So like figure out, where do you put that word in the brain's filing system? So the question that we face then in thinking about screens is, can and do children learn new words? And by extension, grammar through technology. So a little bit of background on some of the demonization of screen time. Originally, when we started talking about the negative effects of screen time, most of the research literature really zeroed in on physical problems. So if you're sitting in front of a screen, you're not moving around, you're not getting exercise, these kinds of things. The learning information has come a lot later, and the learning information for children with hearing loss has definitely come later. So the question we want to answer really is, are screens helpful or are they not? Some problems we might anticipate in learning from screens. We know that learning is more effective when there's responsive interaction. So that is when someone can give feedback and react in real time to a child's learning. We also know that screens are flat. So sensory experiences with new words on a screen aren't quite the same as they are in real life. You get the video and the audio, but you don't get any touch or smell, at least not yet, maybe in the future. Finally, we know that audio recording and production is not always ideal. I suspect we've all had some experience with that in this pandemic. And so acoustic signals from digital devices and digital media might be harder for some children to really parse and listen to than in-person speech. But if we flip that narrative, we can also ask, what are the opportunities that screens provide? Well, first, screens aren't really limited by reality, right? So if I want to talk about zebras, on a screen, I can probably find a zebra in a million different scenarios, whereas that's a little more difficult in my real life in Fort Worth, Texas. Second, screens and TV shows, for example, can be played over and over again. So repetition, particularly for children with hearing loss, even though it might drive us as adults crazy, is a really important part of word learning. Screens can provide really exact repetitive practice. Third, screens might actually be better for intensive repetitive input than in-person interactions. So I'm going to talk about a study in a few minutes using the show Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. We used it in a study to teach children complex syntax. In that show, the number of times features of complex syntax appeared in 22 minutes was the same that you might have to listen to an hour or more of adult conversation to get. So the format and expectations for storytelling on screens can be really well suited to packing in really good language exposure. Finally, as I think we all know and mentioned in the chat, screens are a high interest activity for kids, and that matters. So learning is a draining process, and attention engagement is a huge factor in learning. So if a child is willing to learn new words from Bob the Builder, that's great. Let's harness that interest to learn some new words. So I want to tell you about some studies we've done in my lab, the Child Lab, Childhood Hearing Loss and Language Development Lab, to look at what we know about word learning in children with hearing loss, specifically from screens. There is not a vast spoken language literature out there right now related to intervention with children with hearing loss, and most certainly not a vast one with screens. So hopefully that's going to change in coming years and we'll add to our knowledge base. One of the studies we wanted to do in my lab was to look at whether children with and without hearing loss were more likely to learn from books or from television, especially when the television show was a high quality educational show. So we chose Blaze and the Monster Machines because this is a show that teaches physics concepts to kids, which are words like kinetic energy that kids typically don't know at the start of the show. So it's great for word learning. And it's a very well-made show. We ran a study where a child was tested on the words in the show or the book, watched the show or read the book, and then was tested again on those words. And then we did the other activity. And after a final activity break, we tested all of those words again. So here on the graph on the left, you see our first study with only children with typical hearing. And then on the right, you see a second study with children with hearing loss and children with typical hearing. All were aided. The majority used cochlear implants. And these kids were exactly matched for age and a few other variables. And what did we find? Well, mostly that one reading or one TV show produced average learning in all groups of about 1 word. And these lines you're seeing here are averages. So if they look very similar, it looks like there's not growth. Again, it's because we're representing the average here. We also found out that children with hearing loss started out knowing far fewer words than their age-matched peers. But the good news here is that there was learning in both groups. And again, that line doesn't fully represent some of the learning we were seeing. Part of that is because we found what you would call a Matthew effect here. Those kids who started out knowing some words learned a lot more words during the show. The kids who started out knowing fewer words learned fewer words or no words sometimes. So a follow-up question, what would happen if we watched the show again and again? We can hypothesize what might happen. We haven't done that study yet. From some studies we've done with children with hearing loss in person. So in an earlier study in my lab, we found that when children with hearing loss heard a word 7 to 10 times a day, they could learn as many as 10 to 15 new words in 1 week if those words were presented through direct instruction or follow-in labeling, so talking about the thing the kid was attending to. In a more recent study from my big longitudinal project, the LS study that I'm working on with Dr. Crystal Werfel, we've been exploring word learning through Zoom. So thanks, pandemic, for that opportunity. When children on Zoom hear a word 7 to 10 times in one session, preschool children with hearing loss, cochlear implants, and hearing aids, they learn 4 to 5 words within that session. And interestingly, if we add physical activity to our learning time, like jumping jacks for a little movement break, it particularly improved the learning for our children with cochlear implants. So there's something about moving around, even when engaging with a screen, that seems to be helpful for learning. And we plan to explore that a lot more in some of our future work. So then back to the study that I referenced earlier, why would we think about TV as a good source of repetition? Well, it's because the format lets us pack a lot of really good language information in. So Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, with their focus on social emotional development, uses wonderful complex syntax, which is an area of weakness for children with hearing loss. A student and I conducted a study inclusive of children with Down syndrome and hearing loss, where we used repeated watching of Daniel Tiger in the car, like when they were coming to and from therapy, to see if it had an effect on children's use of complex syntax. Across all of the children in the study, it did. So this graph here on the right shows the trajectory of one of our friends. His pseudonym is Peter. He didn't use infinitival clauses pre-intervention. So before that first vertical line that represents where intervention starts. But then when he had been watching particular, like really rich Daniel Tiger episodes for several days, started using the structure. And we saw that across all of our participants. And we introduced the show to them at different times. So we know it wasn't like something going on in real life, something in the classroom, because we started everything at a different time for each child and saw growth immediately following that little period where they've done the repeated watching. We know that it was a result of our watching and less likely a result of something external. So what should we be looking for in our screen time and media then? I've been working with colleagues recently on an analysis of various children's shows. And what we found are that you really want shows with explicit cues about word meaning. So those might include shows that give you translations of words or use another word that means the same thing. You want shows that give you verbal definitions of new words. that use lots of words to describe something, use lots of visual contextual cues, and those shows that ask the audience to repeat back a word or to point out something that's on the screen. So have you ever watched like Dora the Explorer or Blue's Clues? The strategies they use to interact with children are kind of silly, but they're actually terrific for vocabulary learning. Implicit cues about word meaning are also really good. So looking for shows that actually picture what they're talking about when they talk about it, and shows that give multiple examples of the things they're talking about. In addition to shows with a lot of repetition, those are also good things to look for. So if you can find shows or applications that use both of those kinds of cues, both a lot of explicit and implicit, you're probably setting a child up for success more so than if you have some kind of media that does not do that. So what are our take-home messages from this body of work? One thing I want you to take away is that children can learn from screens, particularly from thoughtfully designed screens and apps. And I'm going to move this so that I can better see. Didn't mean to. Trying to move my block here. Okay. Another thing I want you to learn is that interactive is typically better than not. So if there's an opportunity for you to sit by a child and use the screen and interact with the child, or to have a parent mediate a child's interactions, that's the best way to use a screen. However, it's important to note that passive watching also results in learning too, especially repeated watching. And I say that because of that point here at the end. It's okay to prioritize parent health, mental health sometimes. If a child is going to be engaged watching a screen so that a parent can say, make dinner, we don't necessarily need to demonize that, because there are opportunities for learning even from passive watching. Do we want it to happen 5 hours a day? No. But we can take heart in that maybe we don't need to hate on screens as much as we do sometimes in the literature. There can be value there. And in today's world, it's kind of a given. So if we're going to take something away, it should really be picking out thoughtfully designed shows and apps. Okay, and I think that's what I have. So I will stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Emily, for your presentation there. It's so interesting to hear the research that you've been doing in this field. And I love that list of implicit and explicit cues that you put there. So we've really got a list of things to look out for when we're looking for what TV show or things to be allowing the children to view. Thank you so much. There is a question that's come through on chat, but we're going to leave that till the end of the session and have some discussion then. So I would like next to invite our next expert to the screen or to the microphone. Lynn Wood is an audiologist and a listening and spoken language specialist, certified auditory verbal therapist with more than 35 years in experience in the field. Lynn specialises in paediatric auditory verbal therapy, post-cochlear implant auditory rehabilitation for children and adults, and therapy for individuals with auditory processing needs. She is the founder of the Auditory Verbal Centre of Wheaton in Illinois, and she provides listening and spoken language tools, resources, and activities for parents and professionals on her website and blog, and is an active voice on social media. Lynn, thank you. I'll hand it over now to you.
Thanks. We had gone through this a week ago and everything was fine. This morning we had a little glitches or whatever. But thank you, Emily. I really appreciate your research because it collaborates with so much of the information I'm going to share. So if you own an iPad or you own a tab that runs apps, you have valuable resources at your fingertips to build communication skills for children that are deaf or hard of hearing. Go ahead. I don't know how to, yeah.
Next slide.
Yep, next slide, please. And as we know that it's unbelievable, but just 11 years ago, the iPad was first released. And today, screens are common in all homes and schools, as we talked about. And I'm actually going to talk about, even though many of you said, oh, we don't use the screens in therapy, I'm going to help you guide and coach families, because that's where screen time is used so often. So, okay, next slide. We know apps, and this has Emily had said, are powerful creative tools. They can enhance listening, language literacy. They're visually captivating and enchanting. So we need to make sure that we're really working the auditory skills with children, but they open a universe of entertainment, games, music, and opportunities for children's learning. Next slide. But what is very important is we have to be intentional. We need to plan ahead to stimulate the child's brain through listening. Just like when you're reading a story. And as Emily said, we need to have meaningful connection, meaningful conversations between the app and the family, the child, the adult. Next slide. One of the things that's so important to realize is usually an app, you pick an app, and that leads the way, that directs what our topic of conversation is going to be. Couple little red flags is that an app usually, like I said, doesn't follow the child's lead, follows the app topic. So we have to really plan intentionally to have turn taking and talking. We want the kids to have some brainstormers or popcorn ideas, thinking out of the box. So if we let the app lead, lots of times this doesn't happen. Next slide. That's fine. This is just a lot of parents. Most parents need help, just like we do today, balancing screen time and play time and work time. So as an audiologist, as a speech therapist, auditory verbal therapist, we need to help parents with these important decisions. So the next slide shows you what we're going to talk about today. My talking points are first, apps with a plan, auditory strategies, tips for the children, and something we'll talk about, explode the app. So moving on. Apps with a plan. Thank you. Go ahead. So this is a huge trap you might have fallen into yourself, but many times adults download apps, give it to the child, and sit back and let the app lead. It's a huge trap. It's something we don't want to encourage. We want talk time, not screen time. Many people and families I've worked with sort of thought the iPad was like iNanny. I didn't know that I could interact with my child and learn at the same time. Okay, next slide. So I'm an auditory verbal therapist, and as a hallmark of auditory verbal practice is that we know that the parents are the primary language teachers. And actually 6 out of our 10 principals are guide and coach the families. So we know families need a plan and strategies to build listening, language, and communication skills when using apps. And that's what I'm going to talk to you next. Next slide. So the first thing we have to do is plan ahead. It's not enough just to open an app. We need to plan about, what strategy we're going to use when using the app, how we're going to either use that in therapy, in our clinic, or how to model it for the parents. And then what questions you'll ask, what words we want to highlight, concepts to teach. So we need to know the apps before we introduce it to the child. Next slide. One of the parts of that is do your homework. Many apps have all different features, so make sure you know the features before introducing the app to the child. Pretty simple. Next statement, next slide. Often parents will say, oh, I found the greatest app. I love this app. And I'll say, oh, that's great. But what are you going to do with it for your child? What goal are you working on? And many times I get a blank stare. So we know that just because the app is fun or popular, that doesn't mean that it's going to hit the child's goals. So we need to choose an app based on the child's listening and language goals. Next slide. So this is something that I use with parents all the time. I use the terms 3 hands on the app as a reminder, because so many times, like we talked about, parents fall into the audience role. Even for the parents that sit with their child and we have the app, we're paying attention. But when I talk about 3 hands on the app, I mean, we're all interacting, we're taking turns, we're connecting. So if everybody's hands-on, it really leads to more meaningful experience and conversations. So just a good reminder there. Can move on. We have to, as adults, we just talked about how many hours we're on the screen. So we need to help parents come up with rules. We need to model good citizenship, digital citizenship, but a lot of families struggle with this. So that's helping establish screen rules. Next. I'm going to talk now about some auditory strategies and techniques, very similar to what we use when we're building listening and spoken language, but now with the iPad. So let's go to the first one. So we're talking about children with hearing loss, of course, so we need to consider the sound settings. Do we need to make listening easier? Many apps have music playing in the background or different things like that. So should we mute the background music? Usually. Lots of times you can choose between with the different voices on the app, male, female, other language choices. Some of the apps actually allow you to read the story or sing the song to the child, excuse me. And we always have to think about, oh, what's the rate of speech? What does the narrator sound like? So different choices regarding sound settings. Next, where to sit. You can look at the picture here of the mom and the child in my center, and we want to sit either the little child on our lap or sitting next to the child. We want to hold the iPad out in front of us. It's directly directs the child's focus away from our face on the app and joint attention in front of us. And then we need to sit in a quiet room, TV, music off. So sit near the child. Next. And then we want to be at the child's ear level. We want to be close to the child's microphone and within their listening bubble for them to hear. And we don't want the child to be on the floor and us talking from standing up. So ear level is important. Next. And then, of course, auditory first. So just like if I'm reading a child to my grandson, I'm reading a book, a lot of times I want to talk to him. So I just bring the book up to my chest and we chit chat a little bit. You can do the same thing with the iPad. Out of sight, a chance to take a break from the visual screen and chat. Auditory first. Next. An auditory sandwich. So if we're doing, we'll say a listening or following direction app and the child mishears or misunderstands, I might say, oh, let's try again. So I might turn the screen away. I might tell them to listen, tap the app and have them listen again. What did you hear? Then show them, give them listening with support. And then one more time, put it back into hearing alone. So we really want to be able to focus on that listening. And you can do that pretty easily with app technology. Next slide. Wait time. We know that's important so much for children, sometimes need longer time to process. With an iPad, all you need to do is pull down the notification screen and the iPad pauses. Perfect for wait screen. When you're done, rise it and move on. I think there's one more, it's number 7. Oh, yep. As Emily said, we need to choose quality content. And you know, a lot of the quality apps give us the opportunity, as you can see here at the bottom, to hear again. So if the child doesn't hear the first time, we can ask for a repetition with the app, or we can actually build language by rewording what we say, rephrasing, repeating. So I really like what did you hear and the hear again option. Another option in the next slide is apps that allow the children to use their auditory feedback loop. So that's hearing, thinking, and saying. So some of the well-chosen apps, again, have the opportunity for the child to listen for a short story or direction. And what did you hear? They can actually use the microphone to record their voice and then listen back to the recording. And this is really great for auditory memory, of course, but for clear speech. Oh, how did you sound when you recorded that? Can we do that again? So I like the apps that allow you to use the auditory feedback loop. Next slide. So there's lots of additional strategies that you already know that you can be using, from prompting to listen, leaning in closer, looking expectantly. We always want to, with an app, teach, and all the time really, but don't test. So we're going to move on to our next section. And this is tips for children. Probably the people that say, oh, I never use an app or iPad. They're with the kids that come. If I have a new family I'm working with and the child's had exposure to iPads, a lot of times they are in control, they're tapping like crazy, and it's very hard to go back and reteach. So with little kids, I try to, or we reteach some of these rules or tips, I should say. It's the first one is you can go to the next screen, please, is listening hands. So what I have a child do, I teach them to put one hand on top of the other, palm down the table, listen, show me you're ready to begin. We know the iPad's motivating. It doesn't take kids too long to sort of learn this listening rule, I'll call it. So listening hands is important. And then next, the same child comes, just taps like crazy on the screen. So I want to teach them and remind them, touch the screen once. And if they continue to tap, I use simply the words, tapping doesn't work. We don't need to get into a big explanation, but tap the screen once, tapping doesn't work. And that has worked really effectively. Next screen. We know that turn taking is important, conversational serve and return turns. So if you're working with a couple kids or you're modeling for families, make sure that they give their children turns. Make it interactive. It could be, you know, the one little boy gets 2 turns and then you get 2 turns. You can set a timer, but we want to teach touch by touch. So that conversational turns. Next slide. Now explode the app. This is something that I came up with a number of years ago, and it's using an app, but exploding it, bringing it out into real life situations for listening and learning. You can go to the next slide. And basically, it's how can we use that app, but how can we make it so that we can do other learning? We can do expansion, extension, predicting. What is our strategy for that? And next slide, and I keep saying that here. I actually have explode the app planning tools. App with a plan there on the left actually has you choose the app you're working with. It has goal areas listed and then some of your techniques. And on the other side, the worksheet actually shows the app again, but what songs are we going to sing with this app? What other storybooks are we going to do? And I have a couple examples of that. So this is how you explode the app out of just screen time. Next slide. Oops, I'll say this real quick. At hearingfirst.org, there are, I think, 6 or 7 apps that I've exploded. And then the tools that I showed you are available for free download. I think this is a 53-page resource. So you might want to grab that. And then the next page, the next slide. Oh, I was going to show you. The strategies we just talked about are available in my Teachers Pay Teacher store. So I sort of have a handout with one that talks about the app of the plan for parents and for children, and then the listening strategies. So you might want to go ahead, download that. And there should be a next page. Oops, you know what? We ended up missing some slides. I wonder if this is the one I had showed you originally. You know, I'm just going to talk to you real quick. I do not have this in the slide deck that I had sent them. So with Explode the app, the exact app that I was going to show you is a Bamba ice cream app. So it's an ice cream app. It's a free app made by Bamba, and the kids actually get to open an ice cream shop. They can choose their kinds of ice cream. They can either be the customer or the shop owner. And basically that's great for interaction. After that, I had put two, boy, I'm sorry you didn't get to see the screens. I wanted to show you. I have Curious George going to an ice cream shop, another ice cream book that we work with. I have another slide that shows actually two of my families in therapy playing with real life toys, doing ice cream shop. You know, they're actually taking turns role playing. Let me think. Another slide I had to show you was, let me think. The ice cream shop, playing real life games. There's lots of games for ice cream and things like that. And then finally, making a craft. They're all different, or cooking. And usually if I use that app, I make baggy ice cream. So it's ice cream that you make in a bag. So thanks for listening. I think there's one more slide. Yeah, and there is the Teachers Pay Teachers if you're interested in downloading that, or if anybody has any questions. I'm sorry that we had a little snafu there with my slides.
Not a problem.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Much practical information there. And I love that rule that you've got 3 hands on the screen. And so I'm certainly going to be using that one in future. We've got some time now for questions and discussion. But before we do that, I would love to take a group photo. And this has become a bit of a tradition at Experts Online. So I would love for you all to turn on your videos now so that we can take a group photo. As we wait for everyone to do that, I would encourage you to type any other questions that you might have for our experts in the chat, and we're going to get to those next. So, and I'll give you the countdown, 3, 2, 1, and smile. So that's wonderful. So they've taken the shot. Perfect. So we've got some time now for questions, and I can see one in chat there from Mary Beth. Thank you. She has asked, for children with bilateral cochlear implants, do you recommend alternating the side that you're sitting on with them when you're looking at an app with them? Lynn, can I direct this question to you?
Sure. I don't think it really matters if it's an app we're using or a storybook or another activity. I think that if you would, I usually, if there's a better ear, of course, I sit on that ear. I usually have a parent in the other ear so we can interact with that. So I think whatever your strategy usually would be, I would do that with an app as well. I don't think that really, the app technology doesn't really impact that. So.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And a question for both of you now. We saw at the start there that it's our experience that parents are often asking about screen time for children. So I'm wondering if you have a top tip, or I'm wondering how you respond to a parent if they ask, is it okay if I give my child a device? Or yeah, what is your kind of quick response or top tip when parents ask you that question? Emily, can I start with you?
Of course. So for me, it is of utmost importance that my clinical practice be family-centered. And so usually my first question is, what's the context? Talk to me about why you want to use the app, when you want to use the app, because I find it very unhelpful to shame a parent about wanting to use technology. So I've don't go in for hard and fast rules about, no, you should be doing this, or you should read 10 books instead of using that app. So I think it helps to have an honest conversation about what the role the parent sees the app playing and using. And if it comes out that they want to know more about, can the app work for my child to learn new things, and that's really why I'm asking this question, then of course we can have a conversation about, yeah, here are some things we can look for, and here's a way you can really augment that learning. But if the parent is looking for permission to have 15 minutes without a child running around, I certainly don't want to squelch that either. So in that interest of looking at the whole child, yeah, I try not to knee-jerk react and say, no, don't do it.
Yeah, wonderful. I really like that idea of really asking them why, or what is the reason for the app, and then we can direct them in the right way. Yeah. And Lynn, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. My whole Explode the app and the training that I talked to you about is in direct relation that we know that kids are on screens and families are using screens. So, you know, it can be the iNanny. I had done a parent seminar one time a couple of years ago. At the end of the seminar, and I worked through different apps. Some of the pictures you guys didn't get to see, you know, we introduced how to do that. And basically, I asked at the end a big takeaway. They actually got to win a couple apps, and they had the takeaway. Not one, not two. Every single family said it was new to them that they could build listening and spoken language with their child with the iPad. Everybody had used the iNanny. You know, they might pick a good app, but just how Emily said, well, we know that kids learn best if they're on a screen and they're doing jumping jacks, they're moving. We need that connection. So I really feel that, you know, going through some of the, well, I guess I'll back up. As an auditory verbal therapist, my role is to guide and coach parents. Nothing I do in a therapy session is important. It's what they do at home. So we need to give them tools so that they can go home and actually, you know, use the app if they're going to do that as screen time to build language. But like Emily says, they get a little grace now and then that they can, you choose a good app and give them a little time, but it's giving them the tools.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And really guiding and coaching families about what's best with screen times. Right. Wonderful. So I would like to say a huge thank you to Emily and to Lynn for joining us today, sharing their research and their expertise and knowledge on this topic. Sure. I certainly walk away with a better idea of what to tell parents or discuss with parents when it comes to this topic, and also a few points of research to share with my colleagues as well. So I do hope that you have all found this meeting, this webinar, just as fascinating and insightful as I have. So thank you very much for joining us. I would like to mention now also that we have our next meeting coming up on the 5th of May, the same time and the same place, and we're going to be hearing from Professor Robert Baer on auditory brainstem implants in children. So I thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you soon.